Reverend Dr. Nyle Fort is a minister, activist, and scholar. He works with organizers, artists, students, educators, faith leaders, and community members to build what Dr. King described as the beloved community, a global society rooted in the principles of love, freedom, and justice. Dr. Fort has studied, lectured, and organized across the United States, South Africa, India, Britain, the Netherlands, and more. His writing is featured in several media outlets and academic journals, including The Guardian, the Boston Globe, the New York Magazine, Essence, Ebony Magazine, and Harvard Journal of African American Public Policy. His scholarship has been funded by the Ford Foundation, the University of Pennsylvania, the Woodrow Wilson Foundation, the Forum for Theological Exploration, and the Atlantic Fellowship for Racial Equality. Dr. Fort earned his BA from Morehouse College, Master of Divinity from Princeton Theological Seminary, and PhD in Religion and Interdisciplinary Humanities from Princeton University. He is currently an assistant professor of African American and African Diaspora Studies at Columbia University and a faith-based organizer with the Dream Defenders.
Let us pray. Dear God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Can we give God some praise for this choir? Wow. I always say that I've had a struggle finding a good church for a long time now. I don't know if, y'all don't have this problem, but a lot of times churches will have good theology and bad music. And then there are churches that have good music, but bad theology. I'm not naming any names, but I'm just saying it's really a gift to be in a church that has both good music and good theology. First, I do want to thank God for this precious opportunity to share this time in this space with each and every one of you. I see a lot of friends and people that knew me when I was just playing basketball and just like girls and clothes and having fun. So it's nice to see you out there, Brother Bill, Mama Wright, and so many others. I do want to thank my mother, who is the most precious and beautiful of God's children on the entire planet Earth, for always loving and supporting me. I thank my late father and brother and pastor, all of whom are no longer with us in the flesh, but whose spirits guide me every single day. And I know she's watching, but I was going to say this anyway. I do want to thank my partner for being my best friend, for making the bitter sweet, and for showing me what love looks like in public and in private. And of course, I want to thank you, Pastor, and I want to thank you all, the Elmwood, the Wood. I heard it's called the Wood. I was like, is that the movie or is that the church? It's just an amazing place here. The Elmwood Presbyterian Church, which for over 60 years has carried on the very best of our tradition, a love for justice, a reverence for the sanctity of all of creation. What a gift. I thought I was coming to preach, but I'm just going to give a benediction, because after your pastor and Reverend soon-to-be Dr. Letitia West prayed and then the choir sang, I guess y'all just told me I was doing the wrong thing. But I will try to say something that's hopefully meaningful. The King James Version, I'm a sucker for the King James Version. The King James Version of the book of Genesis, chapter 37, verses 19 and 20, read like this. The King James Version of the book of Genesis, chapter 37, verses 19 and 20, read like this. And they said to one another, behold, this dreamer cometh. Come now, therefore, and let us slay him and cast him into some pit. And we will say, some evil beast hath devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. You may be seated in the presence of God. I'm not going to make you stand for this, but can I read you the version that's in my African-American theological imagination? It reads something like this. A young brother, about 5'6" tall, from the chocolate city of Atlanta. Y'all know where I'm going with this. That black Mecca standing in the southern wilderness of America was burdened by a great dream. And when this preacher brother let the world know the vision that God had given him, a vision of a society built on the values and the principles of love, of freedom, and of justice, some of his brothers and sisters in the human family, those committed to maintaining the status quo, plotted to kill him, then pretended that they didn't do it. For the next few minutes, I want to invite us to meditate on the message, you can kill the dreamer, but you can't kill the dream. I am a Baptist preacher, so there's certain things I just can't help but doing. So turn to your neighbor and say, you can kill the dreamer, but you can't kill the dream. Turn to your other neighbor and say, you can kill the dreamer, but you can't kill the dream. I grew up for the beginning of my life in East Orange, New Jersey on North Maple Avenue, 415 North Maple Avenue. And so I'm home. And so I want to tell you a little bit about growing up in East Orange. My mother, I'm a mama's boy. My mother told me and my brother bedtime stories every night. After long days of consoling, grieving families, my mom's a mortician. I got a lot going on in my life. She would come home, take a bath, and about 9 o'clock at night, she would sneak into our room with a big smile on her face. My brother and I stayed in what we called the little room. Any of y'all had a little room in your house? We stayed in what we called the little room. The little room was a large closet, turned makeshift bedroom that sat next to the sun parlor. Every time it rained, the sun parlor would leak and leave a mild, nauseating stench of mildew that lingered for days. Back then, we had 3 types of clothes. Now, I know y'all know what 3 types of clothes are. What were the 3 types of clothes? Church? School. All right. The kids got Fendi and Prada and Gucci, but we had 3 types of clothes. School clothes, play clothes, and church clothes. One time I tried to wear my play clothes to school, and that was the last game I played for a long time. We weren't rich in material things, but we were wealthy in spirit and in imagination and in the art of storytelling. There was one story, Brother Bill, that always stood out to me. My mom began it the same way every time. She's real dramatic. She would say, once upon a time, there were 2 kings named Chad and Nyle. My mom knew what she was doing. This was the mid-1990s, on the heels of Reaganomics and in the largest prison boom in world history. Rodney King was nearly beaten to death by the Los Angeles Police Department just 2 years after I was born. President Clinton was in the process of ending welfare as we know it, and our neighbors across the street and around the corner were struggling to make ends meet. Looking back now, I understand that my mother may not have had a formal analysis of the political landscape that my brother and I were born into, but she knew from the sheer experience of raising Black children in an anti-Black society, the walls that we were up against. She may not have known that the United States was on its way to incarcerating more human beings than any other nation in human history. But she knew what it felt like to watch one of her sons walk into a courtroom in chains. She may not have known that the cops kill about 3 people a day, but she never let me leave the house without warning me over and over and over again, Nyle, be careful. I doubt my mom kept up with unemployment statistics, but she knew that in our neighborhood and in so many neighborhoods like ours, if you were young and black and poor, it would probably be easier for you to find a gun than to find a job. But in my mother's stories, my brother and I were free to dream. We were free to breathe and free to grow up to become the best versions of ourselves. Stories matter. They say something about who we are and who we can become. Whether we realize it or not, stories are not just fictional narratives, but they are powerful portraits that shape how we think and how we love and how we worship and how we dream. Stories tell us what is possible and who matters and how society works. And I'm not only talking about bedtime stories, but larger narratives that are told every day through mainstream media, through the criminal legal system, through our educational institutions, and even from some of our family members. I'm not going to call any of y'all out. You know these stories. Stories that black people are lazy, that Muslims are terrorists, that Mexicans are stealing our jobs, that you have to be skinny to be beautiful, that if you are poor, it's because you don't work hard enough, that the problem with black people is not over 400 years of systemic racism, but the problem with black people is black people. Stories matter. The story we tell about Dr. King matters. And I'm here to suggest that the popular story, the dominant narrative of Dr. King, is a lullaby. It is a sweet song intended to keep us asleep. The king I was taught in school, as Cornel West so aptly describes, was like Santa Claus, a kind of magical figure who came around once a year to confirm our national illusions. The idea that we live in a land of liberty and justice for all. The idea that we are a beacon of democracy in the world. That despite our ugly past and our fragile present, America still represents the best of humanity's future. But the truth is that King the myth is not King the man. America's most famous preacher was not some naive dreamer who simply wanted black people to be able to vote and his children to play with white kids in the park. Dr. King called the United States a sick nation and the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. He was unafraid to name the loud racism of the South, but also the quieter, more insidious forms of racism in the North. He spoke about the triple evils that Reverend soon-to-be Dr. Letitia West talked about and prayed about in her prayer, the triple evils of racism, of war, and of economic oppression. In 1967, when cities were exploding in rebellion and in protests in places like Detroit and Newark and in Watts and in Atlanta, King defended the rioters, saying that the riot is the language of the unheard. Contrary to the popular story, contrary to the dominant narrative, King cared about much more than civil rights. And that's why he consistently asked certain basic questions about society. Like, why are there 40 million poor people in the richest nation on earth? And what good is it to have the right to sit at a lunch counter if you can't afford a hamburger? That's why he advocated for a guaranteed income and universal employment. That's why he critiqued America's bombardment of Vietnam. That's why he launched a poor people's campaign and stood in solidarity with the oppressed across the globe. We may not know of King the Revolutionary, but the FBI and the United States government certainly did. That's why they called him the most dangerous man in America. The truth is, by the end of his life, about 72% of white Americans and 55% of black Americans actually disapproved of Dr. King's efforts to eradicate poverty and end the war in Vietnam. The truth is that Dr. King suffered bouts of depression, and just days before his assassination, he looked at his friend Harry Belafonte, and he asked him a critical question that echoes till today. Are we integrating into a burning house? But the good news, somebody say the good news. The good news is that King never lost hope in the possibility of building a new house, what he called a world house where all of us lived under the roof of solidarity and of love. He died calling for a revolution of values 11 months before his head was blown off on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel. King said these words: "We have moved from the era of civil rights to human rights, an era where we are called upon to raise certain basic questions about the whole of society. We must recognize that we cannot solve our problem now until there is a radical redistribution of economic and political power. This means," this is still King talking, "a revolution of values. We must see that the evils of racism, economic exploitation, and militarism are all tied together. And you cannot get rid of one without getting rid of all of them." And he ends it by saying the whole structure of American life must be changed. A revolution of values. What is a revolution of values? It's the idea that we cannot remake society without remaking ourselves. And we cannot remake ourselves without remaking society. For King, revolutionary struggle was not simply a matter of politics. Whether you are a Democrat or a Republican, a liberal or a conservative, as if those are our only options, by the way, but y'all gotta have me back to preach to do that sermon. For King, revolutionary love, revolutionary struggle it's about what he learned during Sunday school in that little Baptist church in Atlanta, that all of God's children matter. Elmwood Presbyterian Church, if we want to complete and not merely commemorate King's dream, we have to break free from the old tired story we've been telling ourselves. That we've come a long way, but still have a long way to go, which of course tells us nothing about where it is that we're going. We have to let go of certain comforting lies and face certain terrifying facts, that we live in a society where 1 in every 3 black children are growing up poor in the richest nation on earth. That we have a racial wealth gap that is as big today as it was when Dr. King was assassinated for fighting against poverty. That hate crimes targeting Asian, black, queer, and transgender people are spiking like footballs in the arena of bigotry. That the wealth of billionaires has increased over $2 million since the pandemic has begun to wreak havoc across the world. That the United States military emits more greenhouse gases than mid-sized countries. And that despite the handful of convictions and the pot full of money that have been given to police every single year, police have killed more people last year than any other year on record. The sad reality is that we live in a society where we spend more money on the military and police than we do on education and housing. The sad reality is that we live in a country that has more guns than it does people. The sad reality is that it's easier for white men to purchase bullets than for black people to cast ballots. We must let go of certain comforting lies and face certain terrifying facts. The fact is that what is happening in Gaza is not a religious conflict. What is happening in Gaza is a war over land and resources and political control. The fact of the matter is that we are currently witnessing one of the most grotesque expressions of human brutality in the history of the modern world as the state of Israel bombs hospitals and schools in the land that Jesus walked. The fact is that the bodies are piling up. The bodies of babies and uncles and aunties and grandmothers and children are piling up like trash bags on New York City street corners as mothers and fathers are being forced to live without the warm embrace of the babies that they've brought into this world. The fact of the matter is that Gaza, an open-air prison filled with over 2 million people, is now being turned into a massive graveyard. But I'm a preacher, and you a preacher, and you a preacher, and we're in a black church. So we believe that even the darkest facts can never eclipse the light of truth. The truth is that we are more than the sum of our oppression. The truth is that we are better than the worst things that have ever happened to us. The truth is that we are not helpless victims. We are the inheritors of a grand tradition of struggle that amid the ashes of slavery and lynching and Jim Crow, we created the spirituals and soul food and the most powerful social movements this world has ever seen. We must tell a different story, Mama, right? Not only of where we've been, but of where we are and where we can go. And we tell that story not merely with the words that we say out of our lips, but with the way that we lead and live our lives. If Dr. King is right and the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice, then it only bends in that direction because people like you and I are willing to push it in the direction of freedom and justice. Because we're willing to call for a ceasefire, despite the lie that to love Palestinians and Jews is anti-Semitic. Because we're willing to question the very legitimacy of policing, even in an environment that treats the police like deities and like gods. That we are willing to pray with our feet and get out on the streets and fight for what we believe for in the name of the best of our tradition, to lift every voice and sing the songs of freedom and for justice. If the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice, it only bends because we push it in the direction of freedom and justice. That's why we have to struggle to keep Dr. King's dream alive in the face of the deathly conditions of our cherished form of life. And that's what my mother taught me and my brother Chad in that little room next to the sun parlor that used to leak and cause a mild, nauseating stench that lingered for days. She taught us to dream. Dream of a world where Michael Brown can go to college and Tamir Rice can play at the park. Dream of a world where Muslims and Christians and Jews can live and pray in peace. Dream of a world where queer and transgender people are safe to walk the streets and use the bathrooms of their choice. Dream of a world where women are not subject to less pay for more work, a world where Black Lives Matter. Dream of a world where walls are built to house the poor, not to criminalize poverty. Dream of a world where access to clean water is a fundamental human right. Dream of a world where poverty is illegal. Dream of a world where human value is determined by the breath in our bodies, not the money in our bank accounts. Yes, they can kill the dreamer, but they cannot kill the dream. They killed Malcolm X, but they cannot kill the beauty and the unshakable dignity of African-descended people. Yes, they killed James Chaney and Michael Swarner and Andrew Goodman, but they cannot kill the movement to register black people to vote. Yes, they killed the students in Soweto, but they could not kill the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. Yes, they killed Fred Hampton, but they could not kill the spirit of solidarity that he forged with white poor folks and Puerto Rican nationalists. Yes, they killed Mario Franco, but they could not kill the resistance to police violence from the streets of Ferguson to the favelas of Brazil. Yes, they killed Amilcar Cabral, but they could not kill the anti-colonial struggles in Africa and throughout the diaspora. Yes, they tried to kill Ida B. Wells, but they could not kill the tradition of journalism that, even despite a dot on her head, still went out and documented the horrors of lynching. Yes, they tried to kill Fannie Lou Hamer, but they could not kill her insistence that none of us are free until all of us are free. And 2,000 years before Dr. King stood on the steps of the Lincoln Monument and told the world about his dream, a sun-baked Palestinian Jew hung on a cross on Golgotha's hill. The Roman Empire killed Jesus for turning over the tables of exploitation, for sparking a people's movement that put the love of people over the lust for power. But the Roman Empire could not kill the good news that death cannot and will not have the last word. Amen. And to God be the glory.